După călătoria sa în Novi Sad și Rijeka, expoziția Stories Behind Cities își încheie drumul luna aceasta în al treilea oraș, Capitală Europeană a Culturii, Timișoara. Fundația Județeană pentru Tineret Timiș găzduiește la Casa Tineretului expoziția rezultat a proiectului cu același nume, în care 3 actori culturali au colectat povești și întâmplări autentice din comunitatea lor. Textele rezultate și organizate în câte un volum prezintă spații, evenimente, fenomene și personalități care au marcat aceste orașe și viața locuitorilor. Programul evenimentului a debutat cu un tur ghidat audio prin care participanții au descoperit orașul ascuns. În acest episod Cub Mozaic vă vom oferi un mic fragment din turul ghidat, precum și accesul în primul rând la expoziția multimedia.
Vom începe cu un tur ghidat, un tur narrativ, de fapt, va fi. Vom avea câteva MP3-uri și vom asculta o poveste despre un al 4-lea oraș fictiv, cumva orașul ascuns, care va fi compus din poveștile a 3 orașe. Proiectul se numește Stories Behind Cities și este în colaborare Timișoara, Fundația Județeană pentru Tineret, cu Rijeka și cu Novi Sad. Și atunci s-au cules povești din cele 3 orașe, capitale culturale, și acum se încearcă să se creeze cumva un al 4-lea oraș format din cele 3 povești. Pornim în acest tur, turul va dura undeva la 50 de minute, o să ascultăm poveștile, vor fi narrative, după care ajungem la Casa Tineretului. Turul se va încheia pe acoperișul Casei Tineretului. Este, de fapt, un spațiu destul de greu de accesat de către publicul din Timișoara. Se încheie turul acolo, după care va continua cu o expoziție sub forma unei instalații, la fel, cu foarte multe elemente luate din aceste 3 orașe. Și povești, și fotografii, și videouri. Vom avea și o lansare de carte care se numește The Book of Timișoara și Cartea Timișoarei. Avem bucățile în cele 2 variante. Mai avem câteva surprizuțe, cumva, așa, pe care o să le oferim oamenilor, niște suveniruri, de fapt. Și ultimul element va fi concertul în spatele casei. Cred că publicul timișorean va fi foarte încântat, pentru că s-au ales niște povești cu oameni care au schimbat fața orașului, oameni care au reușit într-adevăr să aducă niște schimbări majore orașului.
Hello and welcome. I hope you can hear me loud and clear. Take a look at your map. Follow the route during the audio walk and always stop on the numbered spots. I may speak faster than you walk, or I may speak slower, but you should try to follow me anyways and stop on the marked spots even if I don't say it explicitly. And I will always tell you when to walk again, okay? Let's go, and we'll stop on number 1. One more thing. When we come to a red traffic light, we shall pause the audio and start it again when we cross the street. I'll try to be articulate and concise, but I cannot guarantee I will be able to keep it straight and simple all the time. I've been living in this city way too long, and I have many fond memories of its walls and streets, so emotions might carry me away sometimes. As you can tell, I wasn't born here, but when I came to the city, it just captured me and I couldn't leave it ever since. I still can't speak the language with confidence, so I will stick to English this time. This monument over there, the statue of the Holy Trinity, was erected as a monument and a symbol of gratitude of the survivors of the Great Plague in the 18th century. Between 1738 and 1740, thousands of people have died from the disease. Once, huge numbers of soldiers, builders and citizens were crammed in small living space, with non-existent hygiene, which made epidemics inevitable. This used to be a marshland, so the people here were mostly fighting malaria. Poor living conditions in straw and mud houses, monotonous and inefficient diet, and the unhealthy environment all had their effect on the health of the townspeople. To get drinking water, they often used shallow wells, or even brought the water from the river, where they also dumped their waste. Because of this, cholera and typhus were the words of the day. Whole towns were quarantined. Some of the common hygienic practices used to be washing hands with vinegar, burning of old clothes, and smoking the room with frankincense. One of the measures taken in order to prevent the spread of diseases was more rigorous passport controls and banning the entrance in the city. Sounds familiar, right? In the beginning of the 19th century, the first smallpox vaccines arrived. Since the vaccine was quite a new thing back then, there was a strong public resistance towards it. So the authorities had to enforce various regulations in order to get everyone jabbed. It's funny how the past reflects our present, isn't it? We should move on. Let's say we want to compress the last 150 years in a small coffee bean. We can almost taste the atmosphere of the different historical periods just by exploring the ways this small bean appeared in our lives. In the pre-communist era, everyone in the city lived the coffee experience intensely. Jewish merchants licensed coffee to the city directly from Turkey in the first half of the 18th century. Socializing over coffee used to be so popular that mothers even brought their children to coffee shops, which did raise some decent eyebrows. Then the socialist regime came with its own ideas of nationalization of functioning small businesses and reducing trade relations with the outside world. Coffee import was quite affected by this, and soon shortages became inevitable. The supply was in decline, and the coffee had to be roasted, because it was a bit too blonde. As always, shortages can inspire great ideas, and one of the characteristic results of this was a famous Necazol in the 1980s. Just imagine drinking a delicious coffee made of 20% coffee beans and 80% barley and chickpeas. To save delicate moments, such as when audits and controls came from the capital, there was an artifice to compensate for the coffee shortage. My good friend, who worked as a waiter in the Intim restaurant, told me how he made a very special coffee for these events. He would take the keys from the warehouse and grab a box of mocha. Then he boiled and boiled coffee Necazol. He put 2 teaspoons of Nes in each glass and poured the Necazol over it and served it to the guests. Later, his boss came in and told him the auditors were over the roof with the coffee. "We've never had a coffee like that. Make some more, make some more." After that, for 2 weeks, he had to make coffee only for them. Necazol was fine when there was nothing else, but we all had some other sources too, or at least most of us did. Family members, acquaintances that lived abroad provided us with real coffee and cigarettes. We cherished these little packages and kept them for the most precious of moments. The smell of morning coffee engraved in our memories as a sign of a happy home. But most of all, I enjoyed the simple but effective coffee made by the Turk, the so-called sand coffee. He boiled the water on fire, put 2 spoons of coffee in it, turned it over and poured it in my cup. As simple as that. But his coffee was stronger than love. However, it wasn't always just fun and joy, and nostalgia filled with the scent of ground coffee. I don't even like to talk about this, but it is a part of our history, so it just wouldn't be right not to mention these events too. In 1783, when Emperor Joseph II commanded the military headquarters to be moved from Osijek, the city with the fortress became the site of real atrocities of those times. Its casemates were filled with military convicts from all over the empire, specifically those convicted for the most heinous crimes. The convicts, mostly young and weak men, were often punished by pulling huge ships upstream. Murder convicts punished by their limbs or heads being cut off. or even by being broken on the wheel. These punishments were often on public display in order to intimidate the townsfolk. The people watched these spectacles with fear and enjoyment. One of the most sorrowful sights was when a group of more than 100 convicts were dragged along the main streets, their feet and necks tied together. They could barely move under the heavy weight of the steel chains. They were half naked, their bodies covered in sweat and blood, trembling. That was a horrific sight. After the end of World War I, in the autumn of 1918, a huge number of demobilized soldiers and civilians who came from captivity spent a few winter months in the city. 20,000 loaves of bread were baked and 40 oxen grilled every day. The people from the surrounding villages brought their surplus fruits, vegetables and wine for the large masses of soldiers and civilians. Imagine tens of thousands of tortured, hungry, and exhausted soldiers, and the Spanish flu. When cholera started to spread in the area in 1831, the first sanitary commissions were formed here. The military hospital was well funded by the empire, thus it was very successful in curing malaria. It was also commissioned by Emperor Joseph II because of the frequent wars with the Ottoman Empire. More recently, it served as a COVID hospital during the coronavirus pandemic in 2020. This hospital was rebuilt and upgraded several times, but it is still at the same place as more than 200 years ago. It's been working ever since it opened its gates, not a day missed, and its name was never changed. The Military Hospital. Okay, let's move on. Huge numbers of injured soldiers and civilians have been treated here. Everybody got their treatment regardless of their faith, nationality, and social status. Those who were treated here were called the ill instead of patients, because everybody was expected to recover. From its foundation, only the best doctors have been working here. Did you see it? Look, over there. No, nothing. Sorry, it just seemed like... Okay, let's just walk. He built the fortress from the stone of the hill, and now, in the graveyard, a huge stone covers his body. His name is Vamberg. From the hills, shadows rise. From the hill upon him, his soul is resting. Says the epitaph on the tombstone of one of the builders of the fortress. He was one of those buried inside the hospital yard, in the place where a monastery used to be. An Orthodox church used to be inside the hospital to service the soldiers and border guards, for whose rights Eugene de Savoia was continuously fighting after their successful campaigns against the Turkish armies. The chapel inside the hospital, which was used for wedding ceremonies, was turned into a warehouse by the communists after the Second World War. It was restored as a church in 1992.
Mai multe curiozități despre întregul oraș Timișoara puteți afla la alte tururi organizate de FIT.